Okay, it worked. Yeah. A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. We are so delighted that you have joined us this afternoon for another what promised to be an intriguing discussion. We are going to be talking about legal issues in the Christian. This really is a part two to a discussion we had previously. A few months perhaps ago, we were talking about should I take my brother to court? And you may recall that we had uh, an attorney with us, Sister Marvalee Franklyn. She is with us this afternoon again. We are delighted to have her. Before we ask her to give a word of greeting, we would like to invite you to bow as we pray together. Eternal Father and our God, we ask that you will be with us. We are discussing legal issues in the Christian. We pray that you will grant us your wisdom and your peace in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, as indicated, we have with us this afternoon an attorney stationed in Barbados, Marvalee Franklyn. Sister Franklyn, an elder in her church, a committed Christian. I ran into her some years ago, so many years ago, when we were dealing with some mission-oriented business. Business is not the right term, but we were planning some mission outreach, and she was the coordinator in Barbados. Delighted to have you this afternoon. Please greet the viewers.
It is good to be with you. Good afternoon, family. And we are still at mission. I sent a flyer into your chat. Pastor, you probably give us a plug about that later, where young people do some work during the next week and ongoing. And yeah, we're still on the work, still on the business, until he comes. That is what he has called us to do. I'm delighted to be with you this evening. So let's start.
That's right. It's really about advancing the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Now, as Christians, sometimes we do run into some legal issues. And last time we were here, we were discussing a number of issues that Christians sometimes find themselves in. We were talking about whether or not it's appropriate to carry our brother to court. We looked at the matter of some of our institutions. If we employ people, teachers, nurses, doctors, secretaries, etc., industrial relations. This afternoon, I want to begin, however, by looking at something we had hoped to discuss last time, but we didn't get a chance to deal with. This is the matter of the will from a stewardship perspective. There's some persons who believe that if they do a will, they're going to die.
Yeah.
And then eventually they die without having one. Now, as an attorney, I think you would agree that Christians ought to be responsible. Yeah. So I would like to get your perspective on relating this to a stewardship responsibility. And should I be afraid to do a will because it might be my death sentence or what?
Well, I have a will, and I don't think I'm exactly ready to go yet. But it is interesting, that you also have the same thing in your jurisdiction. I hear it in Barbados. They have a saying that you're not going to put on your pajamas before you go to bed. To die as soon as you make this will, kind of thing. Yes, and basically. It is either you put together what you intend to happen after you are no longer with us, or somebody else is going to come and take what you have worked hard for and distribute it based on arbitrary principles that have been set up, in succession rules. Yes. Now, the Bible tells us in Proverbs 13, verse 22, and all over the place, that a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. Now, your children's children are your grandchildren. So really, you should be having some sort of plan in place for inheritance for your grandchildren. Yes? Now, from the perspective of stewardship, if it is that we understand that what we have belongs to God, then God expects us to account for it. And I do not believe that God in his wisdom wants us to just leave everything up in the air and have third parties come in to decide what becomes of our wealth. Now, people don't think they have wealth. So let me say estates. Now, God had a principle for Israel, and I think the principle still stands for Israel. We are Israel today, spiritual Israel. God expected Israel to be wealthy because it would set up an inquiry about their God. So the heathens would come and inquire about their God because of their prosperity. Deuteronomy says it is God who gives the power to get wealth. So I don't think I have to give you power to get wealth, that God wants other people to distribute that wealth. Yes, and it doesn't go to build up the kingdom. Now, without a will, if you're looking at basically you die intestate because you have not made a will, your assets will be divided based on succession principles. It therefore means institutions are not taken care of. So if you wanted to leave some monies for your church building fund, it is not covered under succession principles. If you wanted to bless a young people group and the Pathfinder band with some equipment, it is not covered under succession principles. If you wanted to set up a local fund to assist some young people in your community to go and do theology or whatever in scholarship funds and grants, it is not covered under intestacy rules, yes? So I really believe when we see what we have as a part of kingdom resources, then we treat to it differently. And that is why it's important to make a will.
So we are effectively determining what happens to our estate after we die. Now that we are alive, we have the privilege to do that. And you're saying, if I hear you correctly, that if we don't do that, then the state will do it for us.
Yes.
And we don't necessarily want the state to do that because it may not meet our own criteria. Now I want to move on to something else. Now, some persons may say, well, I don't have anything, so why do a will? Yeah, in your response just now, you did say, well, some persons may think they don't have a lot of money, so let's say the estate. So if you can deliberate on that a little bit.
All right. So first of all, when we talk about your estate and a properly constructed will, take into account what you acquire even after you have made it. So after acquired property can also be covered in your estate, yes? We also need to let the brethren know that because you have made a will and you have given the grandson the house, doesn't mean that he has a right to it. No, because the will only takes effect when you die. Yes? So the fact that you left the money on the bank account for the great niece doesn't mean she has access to it now. Based on the principles that govern this document, it means that everything that you have, even though you have laid out what should become of it when you die, you have access to it, to use it, to dispose of it, to eat it, to spend it, to mortgage it and go on a cruise, to do whatever you want to do with it up until the time you die. When you're no longer with us and they get the document and you have spent the assets, they will realize that you were thinking about them at a point. Yes? So the will does not take effect today because you made it today. So it doesn't mean you're giving away everything that you have and you're going to be left, to the poorhouse. I don't know if you have that in
yes, we do. Definitely we do.
It takes effect at death. And therefore, everything that you have is yours until the day you close your eyes to deal with however you feel like dealing with it.
Now, does will deal with other things? Let's say a young lady who is not married has a little baby. Can she determine what happens if she die before that child matures?
Yes, you can. You can. So a will deal. You can put a number of things. So in that case, you'd want to look at guardianship. She would say who she would like to be guardian of her young baby. If she dies before the child reach majority, they will take care of that. There are some people, I'm not saying it obtains for Adventists, but there are some people who have children, some men in positions who have children that they can't acknowledge publicly, kind of thing. They're born on the other side of the blankets.
Mm-hmm.
And there are secret trusts. There are trusts that can be set up in a will. There are some members of your family, for example, because of age, for example, or because of attitude towards possession and money and that kind. You may not want to put your resources in their hands, but you want to appoint trustees to give them a benefit over time, as they come into maturity, not necessarily reach 18, but grow up, you know? So you may have a trust in there that says at X age, they get so-and-so, at X age, they get so-and-so, you know? You can make provision for educational advancement of your children, grandchildren, whoever. Yes, a will covers a lot more than just giving away your stuff. It basically ties up what says, what is my intention should I die? And I know sometimes you have some, I've seen one or two of them where you try to, men generally, you try to control what happens after they die in terms of the wife and her physical thing, you know, so you make a provision that she can only have access to this as long as she doesn't remarry and then kind of things, you know. But the law will frown on that. So the law won't allow you to rule somebody's life from the grave, so to speak. But generally, you're free to tie up your business. You know,
yeah, it's interesting. If you're dead, you're dead. I mean,
no. You have to. I've seen one where I guess at the time he made the will, he and the wife was in problems, and so even though she had helped him to acquire, you know, his estate, he left her the lowest coin in the realm. He left her a Barbadian dollar. You know, but going to stand up in the court. She's going to challenge that, you know, kind of thing. So it was funny.
Oh, that's amazing. Now, one last question on wills. Some persons get married,
right?
Having a will. They then, you know. So let's say I'm a very rich man. I wish I were.
Right.
And I marry this woman, and you know, during the course of the marriage, I decide, well, I don't want to leave anything for her. How does the court determine? Because if we're married, well, if I had a will before I get married, what happens? I should ask that first. What happens when I get married?
All right, so there are two separate issues right there. So generally at law, a will, a subsequent marriage revokes a will. Right? So your will is invalidated by operation of law if you marry after you made the will, unless it is a will that you're making in contemplation of marriage. Yes? So if the will you're making in contemplation of marriage, you have to recite it in the will that in contemplation of my marriage to so-and-so, this is what I'm doing. Yes? That way that will would not be revoked. But if you had a will 5, 6, 7 years ago, you find a new girlfriend and you decide to marry, by operation of law, that will is revoked. So you need to make a new will. Yes? The will is noisy today. So that's one issue. Now, the second issue that you mentioned in terms of, so he's married now and he decided that there's problems and he doesn't want to leave anything for the wife. Yes, that's the second part of the issue. Now, in most territories, what you have then is a conflict with family law provisions and succession law provisions, yes? And even if he has not made any provision for his wife in his will, the law provides for the wife to challenge that, so provision can be made for her out of the estate. Yes?
Okay, so even
or the husband, let me say the husband, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the man is the one with money nowadays.
Correct.
Yeah.
In fact, increasingly, the woman is the one with the money these days.
Yes.
So in other words, marriage, the law seems to suggest, if I'm interpreting you correctly, that a marriage should mean something.
Yes.
Yes.
It means something. And sometimes you may even a situation where she's provided for in the will. For example, in Barbados' position, of which, you know, I'm more of a, she's provided for in the will, but she does not like what she's getting in the will. She can elect, there's a process there that she can elect to settle with her entitlement in the will under the Succession Act, or she can challenge it under the Family Law Act. Yes? So you may have a situation where you have a lady or a man who builds up the other spouse, invested in the business, etc., and then for whatever reason, you know, probably outside children is going away with most of the estate that she or he would have helped to, to achieve. Then there's a right to challenge that for the court to look at that, revisit that in terms of the Family Law Act.
So in a good marriage where husband and wife have all things in equal, how do they go about making? There is, I understand, no such thing as a joint will. So what happens?
Yeah, there is though. Yeah.
There is joint will.
Yeah, there's mutual. It's called mutual wills.
Okay.
So there are provisions that you can make mutual wills. So that, but the mutual will is both of the parties must have the common agreement, and both of them are agreeing as to how the assets are going to be divested. So their wills, but for the name, the recitation of the names, are saying the same thing. Yes?
Okay.
And they're generally done at the same time, and an agreement is usually done at that time. It therefore means that the first to die, so when one party dies, the living party then holds that person's intention on trust. So you really can't change it. So if you wanted to change the mutual will, you'd have to change it between both of you while both parties are alive. The minute you hold the other party's intention on trust.
So what happens in that case if that living person decides to remarry?
Remember, because the law sets up a trust. So the living person will hold the intention and the provision in the mutual will on trust, and you have to carry out that intention.
Okay, wonderful. That's
so I get from the then
very good
area of law called trust.
Mm-hmm. I want to move on to some other legal issues. Now the church operates several institutions. We have schools, we have radio stations, we have dental clinics, credit unions, etc. As an organization, we have moral guidelines. Are some of these guidelines in conflict with local law? If, for example, a teacher gets pregnant out of wedlock, is the church at liberty to dismiss this worker? This is something that has created some controversy in the past, because as a church, we are a moral institution. So what are the expectations? And are our policies sometimes in contravention of the local law?
Not necessarily yet, but we are going to get there.
We are going to get there. Okay.
Yeah, let me just, sorry. I think we are going to get there.
Okay.
And especially as you look to see how the human rights situation is playing out, where people's choices are now becoming rights, right? We're going to get there. But as it relates to the church being a moral institution and where we are now, I will say, first of all, in my jurisdiction and also in yours, the employment laws are premised on contractual principles. Yes, so it's a matter of an employment contract. It therefore means that an employer can write any terms he or she wishes in the employment contract. What is important is that the employee is made aware of these provisions before or at the time of contracting. Yes? So if before your contract, you understand that a pregnancy out of wedlock because our institution means that you lose your job. And this is not only an Adventist phenomenon. I went to a Catholic school, secondary school, and they had the same provision. I remember my math teacher disappeared for a year because I think she was pregnant and she had to resign, but then she got remarried and she came back. She was the best math teacher around anyway. Yes, because it was a moral institution and that was their principle. But what is important for us is that our employment contract must be clear. It must be in writing. It can't be now because you know somebody you recommend to the president, there's somebody at your church and you give a job. We have to get to the point where we're going to separate the business of the church from the church of the church, from the religious part of the church. You understand? Not that the church, the business arm doesn't function on religious principles. We have to be clear. We have to get those employment contracts, and it cannot be now in the 2020 that you're just going to hire somebody and say, go read the IAD working handbook or whatever. Yes? And then 10 years down the line, when there's a challenge to employment, people are going to say to you, but I never saw it. Yes? So we have to reduce those provisions into writing in terms of what we expect, and people must be made to sign on to it, or we're going to be challenged all the time, and we're going to lose those challenges too, as usual.
Now you said as usual.
Oh,
I heard you mention just now, not yet, and that it may get there, to my original question.
Yes.
It's interesting. Today I read of a ruling in the Trillion Court. There was this issue relating to a transgender student. and the court ruled that we have to allow the child to go to school. And as I read, it appeared that the child was going to school and started the process. Apparently started as a boy, and somewhere along the line started changing over to female, from male to female. And then this first day of the new school term, she turned up, he or she, whatever term it is now, turned up, 13 years of age, turned up in a skirt. And the principal said, sorry, you last time you left here, you were a boy, we cannot accept you as a girl now. And they sued the school, and the school lost the case. The court ruled that we cannot discriminate against the human being. So that's an interesting ruling there. And you mentioned that we are not yet in conflict, but we may get there. So can you say a little bit more on that?
Okay, what I'm saying in terms of the a lot of the push towards this issue of gender identity, etc., for us comes from US. And I think the recent composition of the United States Supreme Court has brought us a short reprieve. And I think the reprieve means that we have to get ourselves in order, deal with these issues. As I said, you're educated. Yes, a person has a right to be educated. It doesn't necessarily mean you have a right to be educated at my institution. Yes? So if these are the policies in my institution and they are made known at the time when you seek entry to my institution and you're in breach of that, then we can treat on that level. I believe there's none of our, exceptionally that has now reversed the buggery law. There is a challenge in Barbados Court too. I think there's a challenge in Belize, but most of us are given the time to review what we are doing, yes? What has happened is that the very vocal and moneyed LGBTQXY group, that they have put a lot of money behind this, and so the whole notion of gender and sex and whatever is up for debate, and some of them will require constitutional changes. Yes, so you're going to have increasingly a conflict between our freedom of religion, or freedom, and what US has done. If you listen to them, they have basically created an artificial dichotomy between our private life and the public sphere. So they're now saying, well, that may be your private belief, but you can't come to the public domain with your position, yes? And the more that is eroded, is the more we're going to have problems. So we need to, if it's a school, these are the rules in my school, these are what you sign on to, and therefore I can get you on the basis of contract.
So in other words, a new student coming into school, it might be a wise idea for us to specifically state that if you should decide to change your gender, we don't have a space for you.
At the end, I don't think you need to say that to a particular student, but it should be in your policy document that governs your school operation.
Okay, I get you.
So it's because then they're going to say, well, why did I get it and nobody else get it? Then you're going to be accused of being discriminatory in your treatment of a particular student. Yes? You're signing on to my school. We're taking people who medical science determine are male and female respectively, and make that a broad statement of principle until such time as the Constitution no longer permits you to do so.
Now, as it relates to employment, because, well, first, doesn't a religious institution have the right to determine that they will only employ persons of a particular religious persuasion?
But yes, you're a religious institution. So if you're asking, does a religious, this similar question would be, does a bar have the right to say, I'm only going to admit people who drink alcohol? I only want females to serve, or I only want, so I don't get the artificial distinction. At the end of the day, if you're a religious organization and these are the rules that govern you, at least up till this point, you have a right to say who are the persons that because at the end of the day, people need to understand that our church is a private institution that admits the public. We keep treating our institutions as if they're public institutions open to any and everybody. We are private institutions that admit the public and a distinct there.
Okay, very well. And that's useful. So if I mean, there's a religious institution. I mean, we are Seventh Adventists, so we're speaking in this context. For that matter, it could be any other. But if there's a worker who somewhere along the line changes religious persuasion, and we were to say to that person, you no longer hold the principles and values of the organization, we have to release you, then that should not be a problem.
It shouldn't be a problem if it's a part of your employment contract.
Okay.
You understand? So if it's upfront, it's a part of your employment contract that you came here as Seventh Adventists, and these are the principles that we uphold. But more often than not, the employee is not told that upfront. Yes? And therefore, they have a basis to say, but you're changing your position on me. So we have to go back to create no employment contract in the 21st century. That's where we're operating, and be very clear upfront as to what ambit of operation is going to be.
Wonderful. Now I want to touch a little on the area of, we live in a very litigious society. It means, therefore, that we have to be mindful of what we say and how we function. Can a pastor be sued for sharing personal information? A pastor, an elder, he's preaching and he shares a story. Can a member in the pew say that story is exposing my business and sue the pastor for that?
Oh, you mean like he talking on people's business?
Yes.
As opposed to giving an
as preachers, we share stories. We share illustrations.
Yeah.
What I want to get to is the ethics of.
It's unethical.
Yes.
But not necessarily illegal. It's unethical.
Okay, but not necessarily illegal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Now,
if it is not true, however, and there's evidence of defamation, if the person can prove that he or she has been defamed, then that's an area of law that allows you some scope to maneuver in terms of the member, in terms of bringing a lawsuit. But the issue is you have to prove for defamation that whatever was alleged refers to you, and that the statement basically will reduce you in the mind of right-thinking members of society, basically cause you public odium, and you have to be able to prove that. Yes?
Okay, great. I want to go into an area that is rather very challenging these days, especially the matter of child molestation. And I am aware that this is one of those areas where you report if you have an incident. However, let's say that there is a counseling situation. If a pastor is in a counseling session and someone confesses that he or she was molested as a minor, now the person is no longer a minor, what should the pastor do? So I don't know what is the legal age of consent in Barbados, for example, but
16.
Yeah. So if you're counseling somebody 19, 20, that person says, when I was 13, when I was 14, I was molested by this particular elder or this person in the church. What's the legal obligation of the pastor under those circumstances?
Right. If the child is a minor, there's a duty to report. You really have a duty to report. The issue is whether, and for us, we report to the Child Care Board. I'm not sure who you have in your territory. If the issue, for a situation like that, I would basically say to the pastor, try and get yourself out of the situation. So refer the person to a counselor. and let the counselor deal with it from there, whether they want to accompany the child the young person to make a report of it or not. Yes. If the person is in a position of authority, then you need, the pastor now needs to deal with that person position of authority. I think the first thing that needs to happen is that a private discussion needs to be had with that person. Yes, because a lot of times we can find ourselves in problems because we take reports and instead of investigating them properly, we bring it to the board and it's all out there instead of dealing with it. So you have to tread that thin line of balancing the interests and still not be seen to be covering up for a potential pedophile in your congregation. Yes? As a pastor, you also sit as a representative of the organization, and the organization can be sued, right? I see one coming out of the US, and I'm sure somebody is going to use the principle on us shortly, where they're saying basically that, the church has a responsibility, a duty of care towards its members, so that you must make sure that people, who are in leadership, whether they're elders or pastors, are people of good standing, who will not perpetrate hurt and harm on the brethren. So you have all of these challenges, threefold challenge as a pastor. You protect the organization, you want to do right by the victim, and you still want to disciple the alleged perpetrator. So if it is a crime, allow the law to take its course. We have met a lot of adults now, who can't keep a marriage together, who can't keep a relationship together because of injury and hurt in the past, where especially family members, in some countries, incest is a real thing, but the father, the molester is a pastor, is an elder, is somebody in the church, is somebody who has influence, and we don't want to deal with it. If you don't let the law take its course, it should be reported. Okay,
I want to follow you clearly. It is very clear to me that if it's a minor, then it has to be addressed immediately. So if I discover that here is an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 13-year-old that is being molested, definitely. My question is, how do we treat it when the person is no longer a minor, although the incident took place when they were a minor? And while you're at it, do we have statutes of limitation in situations like this? So how long do we wait? If the person is, let's say 16 is the age of consent, if the person is 17, 18, or if the person is 27, does it make a difference?
For the minor, I think I was checking for statute of limitation across the Caribbean on this, yes, and I haven't seen. So each territory, you have to speak to somebody in your territory to find out what is limitation, because some jurisdictions do not have a limitation on this. I saw in Barbados recently, a lady came back here to report a crime, a rape that was perpetrated on her 25 years ago, because she wanted closure, yes. And now, if it is a child, a minor, you have a higher duty as it relates to that minor, yes? If it is, that's a person under 18, good.
Yes.
The age of consent is still 16, but I don't figure it out yet, because there are certain things you can do, at 16, and you can vote at 18, and you wonder which is more consequential in real life. Anyway, but if the person, so if the incident happened and at the time the person was over the age of consent, I think your job then is counselor. What is it you want to do? What we don't want the pastor to be in a position where you're encouraging the person not to report it, not to do anything, because the church is going to look bad and you're going to bring shame and that kind of thing. You understand that? You should not put that load on the victim. And if you have counselors in the church, you have trained professionals in the church, I'm saying seek the permission of the family to call them in to give you a buffer between them and the incident and the incident. Yes, so you can treat in your pastoral capacity and let the professionals walk with that person through the process, whether they're going to do forgiveness and whatever, whether they're going to walk with them through the criminal process.
Okay, that's very clear.
Case, you follow? And in any case, you are the person must treat to both groups.
Now, I want to flip the situation a little bit now.
Right.
So it is not now the victim who reports to you, but as a pastor, as an elder, somebody comes to you and says, listen, I'm disturbed. I did this thing. So here's the perpetrator who is now saying to you, listen, you know, I did this thing 2 years ago and it's still bothering me. How should I deal it? Do you now have a right, because and that person did it to a minor? Do you now have a right to what do you do?
All right. One of the things that in that situation that the leader is the whole notion of confidentiality.
Yes.
We say that clearly. There is no such confidentiality between a minister and a parishioner that the law acknowledges. Yes? You may acknowledge pastor parishioner confidentiality in the confines of your profession, but the law does not acknowledge it. The only confidentiality the law acknowledges is between a lawyer and his client as it relates to pending litigation. Yes?
That's very important. Maybe you should repeat that.
Right. So I'm saying, and understanding the context, you know, we are schooled, especially because we come from this Catholic orientation, that whatever the confessional is sacrosanct and you can't repeat. But I'm saying at law, the law does not recognize a confidentiality between the parishioner and the minister. The confidentiality that the law will acknowledge is the one between a lawyer and his client, and it's not general either. It's as it relates to litigation or pending litigation. Yes, there are instances, especially in Jamaica, where lawyers, clients were seized from law firms, etc., because they were after, you know, money laundering and stuff, but it was not in pursuance of pending litigation. So there's no blanket privilege that the law acknowledges where you're concerned. So you're not bound by that. And again, you have a minor, it's a crime. Where a crime is committed, the person does not have a duty or responsibility to cover up that crime, and there's no conflict with you reporting that information on your duty of confidentiality at law. In fact, keeping quiet may make you complicit after the fact because you were told.
Okay, interesting. Well, I'm grateful for that bit of information. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, we do have a few questions that have come in. I want to pause here to entertain some of those questions, lest we do not get a time to come back to them. You know, we promise our viewers that we would give attention to their questions. So I want to ask this question from one of our viewers. When we were discussing earlier the matter of the will, this is an interesting question. The person is asking here, there are those who will their property to pets, even plants. How do we see this from a Christian perspective?
Oh dear. Is it good stewardship? That's the question. Is it good stewardship? You know, how can your cat or your plant perpetrate increase in the kingdom to bless others, to benefit others? I think that's the question you need to answer. Is it good stewardship?
Yeah, you know, I think it's I mean, that's a good response, because if you have $1 million on the bank, or you have an estate and you will that to your cat, the cat does not have a sense to reason. So we have to know our purpose. Yeah. And how are we contributing to the advancement of the cause of God? Yeah. So here's another question. Let's just go to this one quickly. This question asks, solicitors' fees to prepare a will can be brutally high. What is the conference's policy on covering the legal costs for assets that are being willed to the conference? Now, I mean, that's a question about what is the conference's policy. But before we go to the conference's policy, if you can comment on the legal aspect of this, solicitor's costs. So if an individual wills something to your church, to effect this after the person's death, what's involved in that?
No, you're asking a separate question from the question that was asked first.
Yes, because I want to make sense of the question and how it applies. In other words, the question was, what is the conference's policy on covering the cost of?
They shouldn't have a policy. I don't know if they have one, but if they have, they shouldn't have a policy on covering the cost of people making a will.
Okay, Great.
Should not have a policy. And I do not think, as the governor in my country, well, where I live, you know, fees are not that expensive in terms of making wills. And why I'm saying the conference should not, because the conference is going to be beneficiary if you're leaving stuff to the conference, yes? And I'm saying there should be, you see, it does not, even though you make a will and this is what you intend to happen, it does not mean that the will is immune from challenge, yes? In your scope of operation, you may very well have family members who may not agree that you should have a given the institution, whatever you decide to leave to the institution. And showing that the conference has paid for this thing or assisted in paying for this thing may support a challenge. Yes? Because a challenge is not a hard thing. All you need to show is that there's undue influence, and in religious situations, I try to guide some conferences, but them don't listen. So, you know, that you really need a separation. Yes, you can preach from the pulpit that people should, you know, be gracious and leave something to the church and stuff. But this whole notion of coming to the conference and discuss your will and talk to our lawyers up here and say, you know, we need to set that, do that separation, because the more, you know, we get in financial strictures and families think they have an entitlement to what you work for, is the more these things are going to be challenged.
A very good counsel. I can see clearly that if a person can prove that the conference paid for this will, then it's one step from there to say, listen, this person was coerced into doing this.
Yeah, but you don't even need coercion. You just need to prove undue influence. So it's not even as high as coercion.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much for that. Another question. So how do we then make a case for religious liberty when an organization stipulates that it is not going to hire persons who cannot work on Saturdays because of religious beliefs? Let me read this again. So how do we then make a case for religious liberty when an organization stipulates that it is not going to hire persons who cannot work on Saturdays because of religious beliefs?
Yeah, but the whole notion of religious liberty is that you must be free to observe your day the same way the non-religious people must be free to dictate what they want in their contract. So it has to go both ways. Yes? And think about it logically. At the end of the day, if you're saying you need to be free to do this, then they must also be free to have a religious persuasion or to have no religious persuasion that governs their employment contract at all.
So really, it's about the employment contract.
For us, it's about the employment contract. It is not constitutional issue for us yet.
Yeah. So if the person says, I need somebody to work on Saturdays, I can't give you the job, then that should be fine. Yes.
It's different. It's about the employment contract. And they must be free to do that just as much as you are free to ask not to work on Sabbath. And I believe that at the end of the day, so what do we do in the meantime? It therefore means that as Seventh-day Adventist employees, we have a responsibility where we are. It therefore means when you are in employment, you can't even, so you have a situation where you go to the job and you were not an Adventist at the time. But subsequently, you accept the message and you're not an Adventist and you want the day. You have a responsibility, and good stewardship says that you ought to be the best wherever you are. Yes? So if in a situation where the boss is going to look and say, this is an excellent employee, do I run the risk of losing this employee and have to hire two persons in that person's position, or do I give the person the day off? And you have some flexibility. You can't go in and demand a day off. Can you go with and open your contract to negotiation? So I may want Sabbath off. Does that mean I'm going to work an extra hour each day, or hour and a half each day to put back time? And if you're a good employee, then, the employee more than likely would be willing to think. But a lot of us, we make a lot of noise on the job in terms of Sabbath, and we have bad behaved in every other respect. So we're not stewards.
That is very true. And, if you really have shown yourself and proven yourself, you stand a better chance of being able to negotiate.
Yes.
For we have to be fair, we must realize that we are bound by the contract that we sign.
Right.
But let me just ask you, we do have a few more questions. We're going to come to them in a while. If you are, operating in a place that has as our constitution says, that individuals are free to change their religion, etc. Should we have schools, we have universities who mandate that people go to classes on Saturdays? How do we relate to that?
We have had as Adventists over the time conscientious objectors. I can think specifically, for example, places like Nigeria, where a number of our medical students, good students for years, could not graduate because their exams were on Sabbath, and they would not change the day for the examination. But at the end of the day, as Seventh-day Adventists need to understand that we also operate in the political sphere. Our vote also counts. Yes, but there's this thing where we figure, you know, we frown on politics, we frown on law, we frown on everything, and we don't understand that we need Daniels in the palaces too. We need Daniels in parliament too. Yes, so you know, we need to have ourselves as a pressure group that put pressure on the political directorate to get what you want. And at the same time, we need to disciple our young people who are in these institutions to understand you need to stand for something, because you may be making a case for Sabbath, you know, exemption, and the lecturers can point to Adventists who are in the class. You weaken any argument that this group as a group need to get the day.
Well, that continues to be a challenge. I had a case recently where this individual in University of the West Indies, to be specific, who could not fulfill a particular assignment because it was on Sabbath, but the professor was able to say, look at so-and-so, that person is a Seventh Adventist, and they went and did the thing. So that continues to be a challenge.
It's a challenge, and then it goes to discipleship. I remember a few years ago, I taught a group of Muslims. Now, you know that the Ramadan holiday, they go on Ramadan season, they go off for a whole month of fasting. Now, those were some of my best students, you know, and they came to you ahead of time. They tell you that a month of fasting is coming up. They ask for their work in advance. Yes? So it is I'm seeking any special thing to say. They said, give us the work in advance, and we're going to make sure we get it back to you because we're observing this kind of thing. And every one of them, they generally go off in October and do their fasting and stuff, and it doesn't affect the grades. And now, a few years ago, University of the West Indies here, or some of our medical students refused to write the examination. I think they missed a whole year and they did not graduate. And the following year, more Adventists joined them, and University of Cavell have subsequently changed their policy in relation to the medical examination on Sabbath. But many times, as you said, you can point to Adventists who don't stand together because, you know, Bajan says every turkey for their own crop is my degree, and I can pray to God and ask for forgiveness. And
yes. Well, we have another question. Well, a few more actually. This one, if a child in our school changes identity from male to female, and the law shifts to protect transgender children, what can the church do at that stage? The child is already in the school.
All right. You know what? These are questions that you and the leaders need to figure out in advance. Because and we have to figure out as an organization, how are we going to deal with these people on a basis of redemption and still maintain our position. Yes, so that because a person changes identity doesn't necessarily mean the person is practicing any kind of whatever. And the truth of the matter is that you can't, are you going to put them out of school because this child is now identifying as a whatever? How do you gauge that? I can tell you what the position is right now as far as we're concerned in this part of the world. Our sexuality is fixed at birth. That is what our law says. We still follow those principles. You're male and female respectively. We say that generally it doesn't mean, it's not even a matter of your external genitalia. There are over 6,000 different markers internally that distinguishes male from female. Yes, and so the Corvette, we have a whole set of cases that says right now we know male and we know female. Male and female are biological issues. Gender is a social construct, and we are not too sure where that is going yet. So you unravel that in terms of of Adventism yet. But male and female, the Bible says what male and female is. The other part of it, the church has to figure out.
Very well. I want to, before we end, touch on, and I want to ask you to share your thoughts on some practices that as an attorney you see in the church that can create issues. I remember once attending, I was visiting this church and there was a baby dedication service. And the minister stood up and read, you know, today we have child of so and so and so and so on. And the gentleman stood up and said, take my name off of that paper. That is not my child. So that was rather very embarrassing. What are some practices that you have seen that cause concern in terms of legal implications?
Well, that's a curious case because I don't know what obtained in your territory, but in mine for certain, a man's name cannot be entered in the birth certificate, unless he goes and swears that he's the father. Yes. Now, if he learns after the fact that he's not the father, then that's a whole nother, another challenge. But I have seen as society gets, economically gets hard, you have a lot of arrangements that are economic arrangements. And sometimes children are not necessarily children born out of just sex or just love or a connection. Sometimes the children are economic measures. I remember I had a client, and the government sent her to me, and she had 10 children at the time, and she was vexed that she had 2 of them for one man. Yes, so it's an economic situation where you have 9 fathers in court, and everybody giving some monies per week. So if 5 of them give them monies, then you really don't need to work.
Oh. Interesting. It's
like an economic arrangement, and you see some of those. You have had situations where sometimes women really don't know who the father is, and as I said, I don't judge you too harsh, but I don't understand, how you can be open to men in the same degree that you can't. Just saying, And I remember I had one case where I represented the man in this case, and when he came. She had put him in court for arrears because he was supposed to be paying maintenance, and I inquired why he stopped, because I fight for children when I go to court. You all choose each other, so it's not my concern, but I want to make sure the children are taken care of. And he said clearly that he met a man down the road at the rum shop, and the man told him that he was supporting his child. Yes. So even though his name was on the birth certificate and he thought this child was his, that caused concern. And so he stopped the maintenance. And of course, the lady put him back in court for the arrears. And the big information, we asked for paternity tests. And when it came, neither of the 2 men were the father of the child. Right. And it turned out that she had 3 men supporting that one child.
Wow. That is, wow. I can only say wow.
Yeah, you have some economic. I've seen situations. I remember one case where I was in court at the time when the attorney was there, and she was in a fit to be tied. But this gentleman was supporting the child who was now 16 years of age, and he was looking now to go off to university, finished up her secondary school, and now to learn that the child was not his. And the blood test came back, the child was not his, and our law does not provide for restitution. So all the monies we would have put out over the years,
it's gone. Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, our time is almost gone. There's a question here. Are there, let me read it. Are there any Caribbean jurisdiction that you're aware of where people can be sued for hate speech when you speak against homosexuality, etc.?
I'm not aware, but what I'll say is that, for example, we need to look at the misuse of the computer misuse. We have a Computer Misuse of Information Act. Most of the times people are saying things about you, they're not saying it to your face. They usually use social media. Recently, there's a Computer Misuse of Information Act in Barbados, for example, that allows you to sue people for generally bad talking you, harassing you, that kind of thing. Yeah. So if it is, I think that would generally be covered, not necessarily on the, you'll be covered on the Computer Misuse of Information Act. That's one for sure, I know. But we don't have any legislation that says saying homosexuality is wrong is hate speech. We don't. You're accused of hate speech because there's a systematic ploy of this vocal minority to play the victim and to use anything you say. You're either homophobic or you're hateful and you're whatever. And we have not, as Christians, mounted a sensible response to it. Yes, so we either cower in our corner or we allow them to, to abuse you. So it's not. Recently, for example, in Barbados, there was a whole host of protests. It wasn't protests. Christians just came out on Saturdays with their placard on the street, and against the whole legalization of the civil unions and stuff, and people just came out to say what the position was, and they were vilified in the press and on social media, etc. And I'm saying, but at the end of the day, if hate speech is hate speech, it has to go both ways.
I do agree. I think people have a choice to be what they want to be, choose what they want to do. But I respect your opinion. You have to respect my opinion. Right? Yeah,
but we are finding that tolerance doesn't go our way.
It is true, and that was my argument with. Listen, well, we don't have time to go into that. So let me just pose this. One person is asking, and maybe this is important because we want our viewers to be well informed, and so somebody wants a little additional information on the will. I'll read the question quickly. Let me try to get to it. Where is it? Can you explain again about the will? The person says, if one person is no longer there, will the one who is around get access to the trust will?
No. All right. So what I was explaining is mutual wills, where two parties get together, go and they do the exact same thing. So I am leaving my property to my son, Carson Greene. The husband said, I'm leaving my property to my son, Carson Greene. Yes, so both of us have the same intention, right? Mm-hmm. Where one party dies, so the mother dies, yes? Upon the death of the mother, the father holds the mother's intention on trust. So he can't change it. That is in the situation of mutual wills. If it is while they're alive and they vex and they want to change the provision, then he has a duty to notify the other, and then they can, either of them can change the will, and that would free the other party to make whatever changes that party wants when they're alive. Yes? But once you're dead, in the context of mutual wills, the other party holds your intention on trust.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Franklyn. Our time is up. We really, really do appreciate the wealth of information that you have shared. We hope to see you sometime else on Let's Talk. Sometime next year, we're going to be talking about religious liberty, and our intention is to have a panel of attorneys, and I will be contacting you on that. In the meantime, for our viewers, please note that next week on Let's Talk, we're going to be having a very interesting discussion. The moral fall of the pastor. Should she be forgiven? So that is next week on Let's Talk. We want you to join us 3 p.m. Interesting discussion. We will see you then. God bless you all. And until next week, when we have another edition of Let's Talk.